Well, so um, we read the first two chapters of this book, The Importance of Being Earnest, in the last live stream. And so I'm just going to read the next two chapters. It's not super long, so it won't be quite as long as last time. But if you miss the last one, watch that last one, then you'll catch up to this one. Uh, all right, chapter 3, watching TV. Jim was growing up in a time when television was beginning to replace radio as the major form of household entertainment. Because of this, he received increasing exposure to the acting world. After the family purchased their first television, Jim would sit in front of it for hours. Popular TV characters during this time included cowboys such as Hopalong Cassidy and the Lone Ranger. Jim enjoyed dressing up as his cowboy heroes when playing with his toy guns, as well as wearing homemade capes while pretending to be Superman. One TV program Jim rarely missed was a children's show called The Magic Forest. It aired on Louisville Wave Channel 5 and had a signal strong enough to be picked up in Lexington. Host Uncle Ed Callie would sit on a tree stump in the Magic Forest and talk to his puppet friends while playing cartoons and silent movies. One of the show's major sponsors was the Ranch House, a Louisville hamburger restaurant whose signature item was the ranch burger. Jim often begged his parents to take him there, but a 70-mile trip for a burger was out of the question. If a certain TV show had a sponsor, Jim wholeheartedly believed he and his family were supposed to use their product. Sweetheart soap was among the products that Jim asked his mother to buy. She told him that it was somewhat fragrant and his father probably wouldn't like it. Jim answered, "Well, the lady on TV said we should use it, so Daddy will just have to get used to it." One sponsor's product that he had a little more success in convincing his mother to buy was a Fifth Avenue candy bar. Jim made sure to have one ready to eat before the show it sponsored aired. That way he could enjoy it along with the people on TV during the commercial break. Comedic actors who would go on to become legends were all over the TV dial, and Jim was growing up, influencing and shaping him, from Sid Caesar to Laurel and Hardy. As an adult, Jim referred to comedian Sid Caesar, your show of shows, as the Saturday Night Live of its time. A TV special that captured Jim's imagination perhaps more than any other during his childhood was Peter Pan. The first he saw starred Mary Martin and aired live in 1955. Right before it came on, Jim was asking everyone in the house questions such as, how is Peter Pan going to be able to fly? And who will be tiny enough to play Tinker Bell? When the production came on, Jim was enthralled, sitting spellbound in front of the television the entire time. After the show ended, Jim ran into his bedroom and started crying. When his mother asked him what was wrong, he told her that he was sad that it was over. Yet, because of the show, Jim developed a fear of anything that resembled a hook, based on the infamous metal limb of Peter Pan's nemesis, Dr. Hook. James Sr. Couldn't resist teasing Jim about it. He sometimes told Jim that a hook was hanging outside the bedroom door or somewhere in the closet. A few years later, Jim actually had a classmate with a father who had a hook for a hand. Jim and the boy were playing together at school one day waiting to be picked up when the boy's father came into the classroom. He noticed that Jim was afraid. He asked Jim if he had ever seen a real hook hand. Jim replied that he hadn't. The man proceeded to show him all the things he could do with it and explained how he had lost his real hand. Family legend has it that the loss was due to a war injury. When Jim came home, he talked about the experience for days. That seemed to cure his fear. It wasn't always easy, but Jim was growing up. Well, you can definitely see there's some, foreshadowing into his future, with the hook, the hook, and, clearly being a spokesperson for, getting his career started. Okay, chapter 4, Discovering the Theater. The curiosity and imagination Jim possessed served him well as he entertained friends and family, but those skills rarely translated to success in the classroom. He found his schoolwork repetitious and dull, with little to hold to his attention. He often got caught up in other things he found more interesting, such as colorful classmates. Although his grades never reflected it, Jim was extremely intelligent and constantly reading above grade level. Yet he was rarely motivated enough to do the work required to take advantage of his abilities. He preferred browsing through encyclopedias over working on assignments. I can relate with this fella. But by the time Jim was in second grade, his family had accumulated the entire Funk and Wagnalls encyclopedia collection from a local supermarket promotion. Sandy remembers Jim surprising her once with an obscure fact, and when she asked him how he knew it, he pointed to the encyclopedias, saying, "From those books over there." Years later in grade school, Jim stood up in the middle of class and began talking about how the Egyptians embalmed people. In gruesome detail, he described how long hooks were used to pull the brain out through the nose. The teacher was not amused. The only subject that confounded Jim was math. Whenever he talked about his struggles with math as an adult, he said he was missing the math gene. Being an avid reader at such an early age, Jim was knowledgeable on many subjects, in part because of the National Geographic magazines his father brought home from work for the kids. Along with the encyclopedias, they satisfied Jim's thirst for knowledge to the detriment of his schoolwork. During the times when Jim was confined indoors recovering from an asthma attack, reading helped pass the time along with the TV. When Jim was 8 years old, his sister Jake read an ad in the paper for auditions at Children's Theater in Lexington. She asked Jim if he wanted to go. When the big day came, he and Jake rode the bus to the carriage house, which housed Children's Theater. When they arrived, close to 40 children, ages 8 to 16, were waiting to be interviewed. The young assistant director, Mary Warner Ford, introduced herself. Author's note, today she is Mary Polites. Ford was initially interested in Jim's sister, but Jake informed her that Jim was the one trying out. Ford handed him a script and was impressed enough with his performance to accept him. Children's Theater soon allowed Jim to put on display much of the potential his family saw in him. His first role was Abraham Lincoln's childhood friend, Abner, in the, in the play Abe Lincoln, New Salem Days. In no time, Jim was consistently landing starring roles such as Prince Charming in Sleeping Beauty and Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. Not only did the theater ignite Jim's passion for acting, it began to instill in him a sense of purpose. Ford was a pivotal influence on Jim's acting career. She was a high school student serving as an assistant director under Fred Slitter when Jim first joined Children's Theater. In 1959, she took over as director while attending the University of Kentucky, serving as resident student director for the UK Theater. Her many years with Jim at Children's Theater gave him a solid start to learning his craft. Looking back, Mary Polites, nee Ford, says that he probably had more potential as a character actor than anyone she had ever seen. Yet she wasn't sure if it would come to fruition. I knew he had the talent, but not the discipline, she says. Jim often missed rehearsals and sometimes argued with her about his blocking, the positioning, and movement of actors on stage. Jack Patty, a well known Lexington radio personality today, was a few years younger than Jim when the two acted together in children's theater. This was around the time Jim was entering his teenage years and becoming what Patty described as edgy for the times. Jim enjoyed sneaking up to the third floor of the carriage house to smoke cigarettes. One time he tried to teach Patty how to French inhale. Despite Jim's popularity in children's theater, Patty says he never noticed an ounce of ego. Jim was usually the center of attention, on stage and off. Um, During rehearsal breaks, he often entertained the other children with his impressions and tricks. Jim was amused at Patty's rendition of a Cinderella spoof called Rendersella that Patty had memorized. The spoof was known as a spoonerism, exchanged many letters in the words of the story for comedic effect. Actor comedian Archie Campbell performed a memorable rendition of it years later on Hee Haw during one of his popular barbershop sketches. It always made Patty feel cool when Jim would be in the middle of entertaining a small group and would call Patty over to recite it. By the time Jim was 10 years old, his family had moved out of Bluegrass Park and into the suburbs. Even though the neighboring families were more spread out, Jim was still able to make new friends. Next door, living a family with a house full of boys, Jim was a few years older than the youngest son and was constantly amazed by the bad language the kids seemed to get away with using. Jim enjoyed riding bikes and playing baseball with the boys next door. During one of their many baseball games, Jim chased after a pop fly, and as he reached up for the catch, he missed and the ball smashed into his top lip. He knew it wasn't good when he felt something crack. His lips swelled with blood, filling the spaces between his teeth. Jim ran home holding his bleeding mouth. The dentist's x-rays showed that Jim had fractured one of his front teeth and another one right next to it. The dentist pulled both and inserted a small plate with two teeth attached to fit into the roof of Jim's mouth. Louise feared that it might affect his smile as he grew older. Eventually, Jim got used to the plate. It never affected his speech, and few people ever noticed it. Once Jim became an adult, he had a permanent bridge made. It was only noticeable in close-ups and bright light. As a kid, it was a relatively minor setback compared to how he would come to feel about his looks as an adult and how they might limit his potential as an actor. Even at a young age, Jim had his sights set on performing. He had become well aware of Hollywood and Broadway from browsing newspapers and magazines at the library. He lived near a street called Hollywood Drive, and the neighborhood itself was called Hollywood. Jim often saw the city bus drive down his street with Hollywood listed on its destination. Young Jim knew that movie stars lived in Hollywood and asked Jake one time if she could take him on the bus to see them. Another source of entertainment for Jim during this time came from the Baptist church he attended with his sister Sandy. When the family was living in Bluegrass Park, they all attended a nearby Christian church. After the family moved away, the drive to the church became too long and they stopped attending. Soon after moving into their new home, Jim and Sandy would catch a bus on Sundays to attend a nearby Baptist church. The pastor there was charismatic, and often Jim would get more caught up in his delivery than the message. With his growing love of acting, it was no surprise that Halloween became one of Jim's favorite holidays. The Varney kids all enjoyed creating their own unique costumes for trick-or-treating. Through the years, Jim dressed up as everything from a cowboy to a clown. Sandy remembers him fooling other kids by dressing up and talking like an old lady. hunched over and wearing a hat as she passed out candy from their door. All right, well, that was the end of chapter 4. That's where we're ended. But I gotta say that it ended on him loving Halloween. I just watched not too long ago. I just watched Ernest Scared Stupid. Man, I love Ernest movies. All right, y'all. I will see y'all later on the next one.